Welcome to the Hunt for the Antichrist. I'm Erika Gray, and I'm your host. Today, I have the privilege and honor of interviewing New York Times bestselling author James Rickards. James Rickards is a 35-year veteran on Wall Street, an investment banker, lawyer. He worked for the Department of Defense and the CIA as a consultant on AI. And James Rickards has just authored another great book, MoneyGPT, AI and the Threat to the World Economy. This couldn't fit more better than our topic on the Antichrist, than our hunt for the Antichrist. And I'm looking forward to the insights that James Rickards is about to provide. Welcome, Jim, to the show. I am really excited to have you on today. You have no idea. After just reading your book is a gold mine for the questions that I'm going to be asking you today that have to do with the Antichrist. So first, before I start talking about your book, MoneyGPT and AI and the Threat to the Global Economy, what is your view of the Antichrist? Do you have an opinion?
Well, I've read the Bible from cover to cover and studied theology quite extensively. I'm not a trained theologian, but I have done some deep dive. I read thousands of pages of material on it. I happen to be a Catholic, so I've read all the letters of Pope John Paul the second, and again thousands of pages in Benedict the 16th. I think between the two popes, they had like 4 or 5 PhDs. I mean, they just spoke 15, 20 languages, whatever. So, yeah, the Antichrist is real. It's discussed in the Bible. Those things are open to interpretation. That's what, theologians and scholars can debate, but I don't think there's any question about the reality of it, whether it's one creature, one individual who is the Antichrist, or whether it's a label that could be applied to a number of different individuals at different time periods. The Antichrist kind of comes and goes. Again, these are all subject to interpretation, but it's a very real thing, a real concept.
Okay, because with AI, I've listened to the experts, and their greatest fear is that AI is going to fall into the wrong hands and be used by evil people. Well, let's face it, the most evil person who's ever going to be coming onto the planet is the Antichrist. There was a couple of things in your book, and I'll go through them. But when you started your book with this scenario of deep fakes and how the deep fakes can be used to manipulate markets, I thought it would be a great topic today to talk to you about the Antichrist and how would an evil dictator use deep fakes, possibly to boost their own empire, their own economy. And we're in a multipolar order right now, an age of empires. What if, is that a possibility? Do you see deep fakes as a possibility used by the Antichrist to boost his world power, or of any dictator possibly using deep fakes to cause things in the market to boost their economy?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. I talked about that in the book, and I'm happy to talk about it with you, Erika. The Antichrist could do it, but you don't have to be the Antichrist. You could be an evil person, a dictator. You could just be greedy. Greed is not good, but whatever your motivation, it could be a political rivalry. You're trying to destroy your enemy's economic power. I mean, for example, you take a conventional war. What happens in a war? Well, one side, they fire missiles, they send bombers and drones and every other type of weapon. But what are they bombing? Well, they're bombing infrastructure. They're bombing railroads, power grids, port facilities, etc. And why are they doing that? They're doing it to downgrade and destroy the economic capacity of the enemy, so the enemy can't build new weapons or fight back or sustain their economy, etc. Well, okay, what if you could do that with a digital warfare? What if you could do it through a computer without sending a single bomb, but you could have the same effect? You could destroy their economy. Well, that would be an even better weapon because it could work quickly. It wouldn't cost very much. You just have to know how to do it. So the short answer is Could the Antichrist do it? Yes, it would be a very convenient tool. I suppose the Antichrist might have some supernatural powers, but to the extent you have to deal with what's available, it could certainly be used for that. But it could be used by criminals, by political enemies, by dictators. I worked for the CIA for a number of years, and I helped the CIA create a new branch of intelligence we call market intelligence or market, basically using market signals from stock markets, commodity markets, and bond markets to detect enemy action. And then we started doing it for counterterrorism to prevent the next 9/11. Not very many people know that there was insider trading ahead of 9/11. There were some people, other than of course, the terrorists themselves knew, but they had backers, they had family members, they had safe houses, drivers, cooks, whatever, who also knew the attack was coming. And some of them went in and they bought put options on American Airlines and United Airlines, the two airlines that were hijacked, made a lot of money. So what we at the CIA said was, okay, if there were going to be another terrorist attack, would that happen again? Would there be insider trading? Could you see it? Could you trace it to the source, get a FISA warrant, break down the door, and stop the attack? That was our mission, and we decided that the answer to all those questions was yes. You could find it, etc. And then we built systems to detect it. So to kind of answer your question, Erika, that the bad guys can operate through stock markets and bond markets and commodity markets to do economic damage or just to steal money. But it is also possible to detect some of that and try to prevent it. So it's a cyber financial war, which is one of my areas of expertise, but that could definitely play out. So in the book, I create a scenario where I have a couple players. One guy, he runs a family office, so he's very wealthy, manages his own money. Another two guys are crooks. They're hedge fund traders. They're very familiar with markets, but they're out to sink the markets and make a lot of money and just get away. Then there's a Chinese cyber warfare unit that is just they're not trying to make money, they're trying to destroy wealth. They're trying to attack the United States financially in the way we described. And then I have other players. There's a Fed chairperson and the press and media and so forth. Anyway, so I go through this whole scenario, but and I won't recite it all in detail here. Hopefully people buy the book and read it and get something out of it. But the point that I make is there was no mastermind. The criminal gang, and I had them in Mallorca, they didn't know about the Chinese cyber hackers. The Chinese didn't know about the wealth manager in New York. The president of the New York Stock Exchange didn't know what was behind the market collapse. Everyone was acting on their own in their own self-interest or doing their jobs, but nobody had the whole picture. And I did introduce deep fakes, which are words and images, soundtracks and images that are that can be created, synthesized, that pretend to be, for example, government officials or market officials talking about the market. So it's all in there.
But back to this being used by a government. If, let's
Yes.
say, within a government, there was an operation, when you advise the CIA, is that something that's being looked at? Because this is something we know the Antichrist is going to be extremely evil. He's going to be the dictator that's on steroids of
Right.
all of history. And so we can almost figure that he would probably do something like this within his cabinet. Is this something that the CIA is looking at, something that you've advised? In other words, I know what you're saying on the scale that you're talking about, where terrorists use it. And I read that in your book, and it was just shocking and fascinating in your last book, actually, that I read. But what about a government having the ability? I mean, is anybody looking at that? I mean, this is one of the dangers. Let's say even China. Let's say forget the
Yeah.
Antichrist, but I'm looking at the Antichrist and the capabilities he would have with AI. In other words, you're going to put AI into the hands of the most dangerous person who's ever existed. And
Right.
that's some of the scenarios I want to look at. And is the government prepared for this? Have you prepared the government for this?
Well, I've tried. I did it for over 10 years. I've also advised the Pentagon and the White House and Department of Treasury. So I've been, kind of get all the meetings in Washington and warn people about the kinds of things. So I would say a couple of things. Number one, with what I did at the CIA, we were basically playing defense. We were saying there are bad actors out there. Could be governments, could be individuals. I can't say that any time I was working at the CIA, we said, let's look out for the Antichrist.
No,
There
of
is an
course not.
Antichrist,
Nobody's going to.
but the point is, it didn't matter if the Antichrist is a bad guy or a bad person or a bad creature. For purposes of this discussion, they're not really any different than an evil government or a greedy market participant or a non-government entity, a terrorist organization, et cetera. They would all sort of do the same thing. They're bad actors and they want bad results, and they would all sort of do the same thing. And so we modeled that and said, it was a two-step process. Number one, what would the bad guys do? How would they act? What markets would they be in? How would they try to destroy our markets or destroy our economy? Then step two, what can we do to detect it? Are there clues? Can we see that coming? And then can we trace it to the source and stop it from happening? So it was a two-step process. So I absolutely did that. I've also built private models. I've done what we're talking about now. There are all kinds of private applications if you're a trader or an investor and so forth. So the short answer, Eric, is yes. In the wrong hands, it can do enormous damage. And then the question then is, what's the response function? What can governments do to head it off? What can individuals do to preserve wealth? And I remind people, look, it's hard to make money. You got luck plays a role, but it's usually hard work and brains and kind of being entrepreneurial or contributing in some way. It's hard to make money. It's easy to lose money. You can lose money in a lot of ways. Bad investments and market crashes and so forth. So I tell people, yeah, good luck making money. Yeah, that's fine, but don't lose it, because when you lose it, you're getting set back and you got to like run the race over again. And so the key to not losing it is a couple of things. Number one, know what the dangers are. I offer warnings about that. Look for them, and then take steps in advance to protect yourself, so that even if the bad actor does come out and launch some kind of attack, you're going to be fine because you diversified your portfolio in a certain way.
I like that about your current book, in that you actually outline some very practical steps. What's great about this current book is that a layperson who does not know a lot about finance can easily follow those steps. So I think that that's a great feature of your book. So in consulting the CIA, or consulting or working with the CIA, so I understand that in your previous book, you talked about the terrorists and how they orchestrated 9/11, which was just absolutely shocking, and how they really benefited from that. But what if it's a government? Now, let's face it, a government has access to much, much more. But what if it's a government? And again, we're doing this with a view to prophecy, with a view to that final empire that the prophet Daniel talks about is going to be terrifyingly, exceedingly dreadful and strong. And we know that governments and empires become strong through economic prosperity. So I'm asking you, what kind of cheating can be done by an unscrupulous government empire to win this economic race? Could there be ways that AI could be used and it be undetected, not found till later?
Right. The answer is absolutely. I'll give you some concrete examples. We can talk about it in the abstract, but I'll give you some very concrete examples. So we talked about deep fakes. Okay, it's an image. You and I are recording this interview. You're real, I'm real. It's coming in digital form, but we're real people. But it's possible if I gave you several thousand hours of videotape, but basically digital recordings of some public official, and just say Jay Powell is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So I give you several thousand hours of Jay Powell giving speeches. And in a particular venue, I give you thousands of hours of the Economic Club of New York or the boardroom at the Federal Reserve, and I've been there, et cetera. If I give you all this, there is software you can buy right now that will take that and synthesize whatever scenario you want to create. So when you look at the image, you won't be able to tell. It'll walk and talk like, I'm not picking on Jay Powell. It could be anybody. It could be the president, but it'll walk and talk like the Jay Powell in my example. Sounds just like him. The backdrop will be perfect. Hey, here's Jay Powell giving a speech at the Economic Club of New York or at the Federal Reserve boardroom, and you're watching it and you leak it to CNBC or Fox Business or Bloomberg or any media channel, and they report it, everyone's going to think it's real. And then you write the script and you say, well, for example, there's a Fed meeting coming up soon. Everyone expects the Fed to cut interest rates. I'm sure they will. But what if the chairman gave a speech saying, you know what, we were kind of wrong about inflation. We thought it was over, but inflation's still around. So we're gonna skip this one. We're not going to cut interest rates at the next meeting, or maybe we're even going to raise interest rates. But it's completely fake. Like what I just said is completely fake. But it gets pushed out there in the right channels. People believe it. The market would react immediately. They would say, oh, I can't believe it. Stocks would go down, bonds would go down because people think interest rates are going to go up. The dollar would probably go up, but either way, there would be major disruptions in all markets, all because of a fake that you can create not very easily. There was a reporter not long ago, and I talk about her in the book. She did this to herself. She said, well, she went into a studio and recorded just read off a teleprompter and walked in and out, B-roll and a lot of images, and threw it into the system. And it created a synthetic version of her that her mother couldn't tell it wasn't her. Her mother thought it was. So this is powerful
Wow.
stuff. It's not hard to do.
Wow.
And I can fake with, you need the money, and it's not free, but with some time and effort and some raw material, voice and image, using the software, I can make any public figure say anything I want.
Wow. There was something else in your book that just blew me away. Again, I'm thinking in terms of the Antichrist. When you said you spoke with, I believe, a woman who headed a tech company, saying that with AI, they're going to be able to recreate any world leader who's now deceased. And you
Right.
can have in-depth conversations with that leader. And I thought about this and I said, and I want to throw this at you, Jim, and get your thoughts. We know that dictators demand that the population worships them. What about the Antichrist having that ability to recreate himself in this process so that he could say that anybody could now converse with him and thus be everywhere through this type of a technology? And I thought about that, and that's actually would be blasphemous because we know that the Antichrist is going to blaspheme God. But what do you think of that, of the Antichrist? And again, when we think of him as a dictator, he's going to be heading the most powerful empire. He's going to bring it to its pinnacle of power. And what do you think of a dictator doing something like that? So they could literally be there for their population.
Right. Well, I'm not sure how much time you spend, and probably some, doing numerology, but one aspect of numerology is a letter or a series of letters can represent numbers. So I could say A is the number one, B is the number two, et cetera, but then apply that to different alphabets, Greek and Hebrew and so forth. Well, in the Hebrew alphabet, they don't have the letter V or the phonic V. They just don't have it. It's kind of a W. So or it's the other way around. They don't have the W, they have the V.
Mhm.
So when they say wash, they'll say botch. If you listen to an Eastern European Jew speaking English, they'll say, bat yavan, I got a botch. I mean, that's just how they sound. But that's because in their phonic system, they don't have the W, they have the V. So the bat is how you pronounce the letter. But that corresponds if you were writing www, World Wide Web, and you put in VVV because that's the phonic they have. That's the number 666. It's the sixth
Wow.
letter of the Hebrew alphabet.
Wow.
So start there and say, is the entire World Wide Web in Hebrew numerology 666 dot slash whatever website we use, is the entire web the creation of the Antichrist?
Actually, in the scriptures, the airwaves are Satan's. The airwaves.
Right.
We see the numerology in Nebuchadnezzar's image that we have 6 instruments and music equates to numbers. And also it was 60 cubits by 6. So we
Right.
see that as a depiction of this future mathematical, and you would understand that that's an area that you excel in, is mathematics.
Right. Well, like take the Book of Revelation, chapter 6, where talking about in the Catholic theology, we say the Virgin, but the literal script is the woman cried out in pain, the woman cried out in childbirth, the red dragon waited to devour the child, and its tail swept a third of the stars from the sky. That's in chapter 6, Book of Revelation. Well, okay, if you sweep a third of the stars from the sky, what's left? Two-thirds. Convert that to a decimal, 666. So, and it doesn't
Wow.
say it doesn't say 666. It does say two-thirds, but a two-thirds fraction, when you convert to decimals, is 666. Infinitely 666.
Now,
So
did you
the
come
others,
to these discoveries through your acumen, through your knowledge? Was this something that you discovered?
well, I do a lot of research. For example, if I said, "Who's the greatest mathematician of all time?" Well, you could get a debate on that. Some people say Leibniz and others, but a lot of people say Sir Isaac Newton. He invented calculus. He came up with the planetary laws of motion, the laws of thermodynamics, and maybe was the greatest physicist mathematician of all time. Very few people know that all of his work on calculus, planetary motion, thermodynamics, etc., was a small fraction of his time. What he spent most of his time doing, he was the master of the mint in the UK. He put the UK on a gold standard, created gold coins, but he also spent years reading the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation and other apocalyptic literature. But those are the two, one from the Old Testament, one from the New Testament, are the two leading examples of apocalyptic literature, or Revelation, end of the world, whatever you want to call it. But apocalyptic is the actual term of art for that kind of literature. But Daniel and Revelation in particular. But he went through line by line by line, character by character, name by name, the king with seven crowns, etc. And he related it all to, first of all, to world history up to his day. So, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, Middle Age monarchs, and he sort of tracked them all and said, well, this person is that person, etc. It's quite detailed, and I don't obviously have time to explain it all. But that's what he did. That's what he spent most of his time doing when he wasn't, inventing calculus. But he used that to come up with a date for the end of the age. Now, again, Catholic interpretation of the Bible, we don't talk about the end of the world. We talk about the end of
Mhm.
the age. So the world will continue, but it'll be a different place. But you do have the end of the age. But he actually came up with a date. But maybe I'll just let your readers discover Sir Isaac. Let your listeners discover Sir Isaac Newton. But it's from today's date. It's not in the distant future. And by the way, there are other
What
completely
was the date?
2040. So for a number, yes, 2040. But he wrote that in the early 17th century. He wasn't writing today like, yeah, I think we got 10 years left. He was writing in the 1620s that his estimate was that the end of the age would be in 2040. Now, there's other evidence completely uncorrelated. Again, you get into Marian prophecy and what's going on in Medjugorje and the messaging there. And there are five seers who actually see the Virgin Mary and they take messages, etc. And they have 10 secrets, not all of which have been revealed, but when they are, you can start the clock running. But if you just look at when this started, which was the 80s, I think 81 or 82, they were children, they were 10 or 11 years old, and say, well, average life expectancy 75, some numbers 75, 80, which means that if all this is valid, and at least for the Catholics we think it is, and if they're going to get all the secrets and the secrets will be revealed as they unfold, then these people still have to be alive to reveal the secrets, and they're not going to live forever. Nobody does. And so you say, well, with an average life expectancy and starting in 1980, when will these revelations come out? Because they got to do it before they die. The answer is right around 2040. They'll all be in their mid 70s or so. And so I've got two completely different sources. Isaac Newton with a 17th century
It's an
manuscript.
interesting theory. I mean, you've got my interest. I mean, definitely got my
Well,
interest with this. It's definitely
I can't
interesting.
prove I can't prove anything, and the Bible warns, don't. When someone asks Jesus when's the end of the world, he goes, even Jesus doesn't know, only the Father knows. That's a quote from
Yes, but what is
from
interesting about that is once the tribulation period begins, you're actually given the number of days. You have the 2,300 days of Daniel, won't go into that. That's 7 months after the start of the tribulation, the third temple's built. But you also
right.
have this 1,260 days from the start of the Great Tribulation, which Jesus talks about. So I find that interesting that once the tribulation period begins, those believers living at that time are going to know the number of days because it's given in the Revelation, this 1,260 in the book of Daniel. Then there's the 1,290, which is that's another story of the 30 days of the final judgment, Revelation judgments.
Right.
But I find it also interesting that you're talking about Newton being totally fascinated by the prophetic forecasts.
You can find those works, and I've read them. Matthew says, you hypocrites can tell the weather, but can you not see the signs of the times?
And
And
I
that was
noticed
kind of
that was your verse. You had a verse that started your book. And I was
right.
also very surprised about reading the seasons and the times. One of the things I want to say about the scriptures is they're really discounted, and people who usually don't understand them talk about the contradictions. I've actually found there aren't contradictions. But I found a lot of different things. I find it a fascinating book. It's a dimensional book. And actually, AI is dimensional. I just happened to be listening to something on that. And I said, wow, this is exactly the language is simplistic in the Bible, but yet it just unfolds into
Right.
very deep truths and mathematical, and you find science and things that seem absurd. You can find it's really not, there's science in this.
Right.
I mean, have you found that as you've gone into the scriptures?
Oh yeah, there are a lot of things that I would say superficial reading, or someone who just wants to be a critic would say, well, look at this and look at this. They contradict each other. And I look at them and I say, well, actually, they don't. There's a message that's in common. For example, Jesus says, you don't hide your light under a bushel. If you have something to offer, be the light to the world. Don't hide, and literally, don't hide your light under a bushel. But then there's another verse that says, the benefactor walking through the temple, blowing trumpets, showing
Mhm.
off, etc., with his robes uh, has no reward in heaven because he's had his reward on earth. So you read those two sections, and say, well, wait a second, should I like kind of try to get the message out there, or just keep my head down and just talk to the Father in private? They seem contradictory, but they're not. And the reason they're not is they're both true. It has to do with your motivation. In other words, if you're going to be a light, do it in a modest way. Don't do it because of you. Do it because of Jesus. Do it for the right reasons. And so the guy showing off in the temple, he's broadcasting, but he's doing it for all the wrong reasons. And when they say don't put your light under a bushel, yeah, shine your light, but do it modestly and do it for the right reasons. So they don't actually contradict each other. They just teach the same lesson from two different directions. Yeah, so you have to be modest, be a little bit humble, I think, in your interpretations. But there's a lot there. There's a lot of depth, no doubt about it.
I want to bring up something else too. And in the dimensional aspect, I discovered that when Jesus mentioned the birth pangs, and I know you're going to appreciate this being a hedge fund, you had managed a hedge fund and um, being a finance person on Wall Street, when he said birth pangs, well, if you take a fetal monitor, that's a chart. And if you take the fetal monitor chart and you look at the statistics of the weather patterns since about 1960, but they really spiked up at 2000, you see we're following that birth pang chart. So bringing up the birth pangs that Jesus talked about, but again, this is the dimensional aspect of the forecast or of the scriptures. What is your thoughts on the fact that of the end times, the weather patterns now, and how this extreme weather or these signs, which are not letting up, they're totally following this birth pang chart. How is that affecting markets now? How is that affecting commodities and stocks for different products. We see, even immigration in part South America, and some of the immigrants are leaving because they can't earn a living because of the climate disasters. So I want your thoughts on that. And is the markets, how is this affecting the markets? And how do you see it affecting the markets as these continue to escalate?
Well, I just know when I was young, I was growing up, my mother was a nurse, and this is back in the day when they wore this bright white uniforms, very crisp, and they had little nurse's hat. And it was stiff. I think they dressed a little more, maybe in scrubs today. But she was quite the nurse, and but she would go to the hospital, or Lady of Lourdes Hospital near Camden, New Jersey, and she would say, "Well, tonight's going to be a really busy night in the maternity ward." So how do you know that? Because she goes, "It's a full moon," and there is good empirical evidence that women about to give birth go into labor with more frequency on a full moon. Seeing the tides are pulled by the moon. So there are physical manifestations of planetary and lunar phenomena on the Earth. It's not even a surprise. There's good data behind it. As far as climate change is concerned, here's the point. Climate change is real. We had what was called the Roman warm period around 200 BC. A lot of people say that that's how Hannibal was able to get those elephants over the Alps, because it was a relatively mild climate at the time. There was a late Roman warm period. There was a medieval warm period around 1000 AD. That's when the Vikings left Norway and they went to Iceland. They went to Greenland. They called it Greenland because they had farms. They were growing grapes and had livestock. Today these places are under 20 feet of ice. But at the time, they were not warm, but they were able to grow crops and live there. And in fact, some of the Vikings went as far east as Newfoundland. We have the artifacts and the ruins of the settlements, and who knows how far up the St. Lawrence River they went. Maybe they ran into Native Americans. But the point being, and then we had the Little Ice Age, which lasted for centuries, but kind of centered around 1650. Probably started in the 14th century, lasted until the late 19th century, with a center around the mid 17th century, when Europe was so cold, the Thames River froze. You didn't even need a bridge. You could walk across the river all winter. They had what they call frost fairs, where they set up booths and the equivalent of flea market or shops or whatever on the river, because it was frozen solid. And this is back in the days, when you get stories like Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates, because all the canals in the Netherlands were frozen also. So whether it's the medieval warm period or the Little Ice Age, climate change is real. The question is, what causes it? And so if you said to me, we're seeing examples of extreme weather and it's causing as agricultural aspects, absolutely, et cetera. I would say, yeah, I want to see the evidence, but that sounds plausible, or certainly possible, because we have many examples from the past. But then where it gets tangled up in politics is the false assumption that it's caused by CO2 emissions. In fact, the best science says the opposite. Like warming, it's not that CO2 causes warming. There's no evidence for that. There is evidence that warming releases CO2. So when you see higher CO2 counts in the atmosphere, and they're a little higher, not a lot, but a little bit higher, it's not that that's causing the global warming. It's more the other way around, that a warming trend would cause that to happen. That's just the best science. What the thing that causes climate change are solar cycles, kind of some of the things you were referring to, Erika. Solar cycles, ocean currents, what's called subduction, where normally cold water sinks and warm water rises, but there are times when the opposite will happen. The surface water is called a subduction, where the warm water goes below when the Gulf Stream reaches certain Arctic currents, etc. And volcanoes. Volcanoes throw enormous amounts of particles in the air and do block out the sun and can cause disruptions. And the biggest driver of climate change, as far as they can tell, is just clouds. Just moisture in the air does have some of the greenhouse effects. So nothing to do with industry. Everyone's against pollution. Nobody thinks pollution is a good thing, and I certainly don't. But it's if there's warming, and that's debatable, but if there is, it's not caused by CO2. It would be caused by one or more of the other factors I mentioned, which are all natural. They do occur in cycles, not all the time, but they happen. And so, yeah, if you look back over, I gave examples going back about 2,500 years, but there are, uh, paleometeorologists and geologists and others who getting ice cores out of Antarctica, pardon me, who can document this going back much, much further. Now, does that affect
Well,
markets, commodity prices, transportation costs, all those things, diet, nutrition? We do have enormous poverty and malnutrition in places like Africa and elsewhere, but I've studied it closely, and it's almost always due to corruption and bad government. In other words, there's enough food to go around. We can grow enough food for everybody in the world. It's completely doable. We probably do it when you count all the waste and all the food we throw away. Why can't we get it to the people who need it? And the answer is because the dictators have their hands out and they want bribes, and there's corruption along the way, and it gets diverted. A lot of political issues. So, but it's all different forms of bad behavior. Getting back to the Antichrist, whether it's greed, corruption, malfeasance,
that's what I want to talk
intention,
about. I've already
etc.
stated that
Yes,
the Antichrist will
that's all we.
champion green policy, but I want to talk to you about green policy because it's my opinion that whether it's the European Union, which is supposed to be in the lead on the green policy, the idea do they really care? No, I think it's really about they're looking to produce the next products. I just want your opinion on this. They're and including the United States, and they're looking to produce the next products, to have new products made because everybody's in that race for the strongest economy so that they could be the strongest world power on the world stage. And so it's my opinion that it's being abused, misused. It's being put out that they're really concerned about the economy. I know Franz Timmerman, he's a vice president in the EU Commission. He's a former VP. He stated that the economy or the green policy is really to boost the Europe's economy. So do you agree that that's really what green policy is about, more of boosting economy than the government's caring about the climate or blame? And I think they blame it on CO2 just so that they can come out with these newer vehicles, electric vehicles.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Green policy is greed policy. I agree with you
Green
completely.
policy, great. Jim, we like to end the show with the Divine Dozen, and that's a series of questions so that our guests can really get to know who you are and what makes you tick. So the first question is, what book is on your bedside table?
I'm reading a book called The Habsburgs. It's a good 300 or 400 pages, but it's a history of the Habsburg dynasty. But they were the leading royal family in Europe for well over 500 years. Had a whole series of, the Holy Roman emperors were all Habsburgs. They ruled in Austria, present-day Austria, Bavaria, Spain, the Netherlands, and the parts of the New World conquered by Spain.
What was the last TV or streaming show that you watched?
I'm right in the middle of a show now. It's called The Queen's Gambit. It's a coming of age show about a girl who was orphaned and under kind of tragic circumstances grew up, but she's a super genius chess prodigy, and she starts out not even knowing what chess is. Runs into a janitor, handyman who's playing chess. She goes, "What's that game?" And then, anyway, she goes on to win tournaments and etc. It's extremely well done, a great acting, great casting. But if you're a chess player, which I am, you really get a lot out of it.
What three songs would be on your all-time playlist?
Oh, I like Whispering Pines. It's a song by the band. I'm a big fan of Joni Mitchell. I would say you could pick, oh, take Blue, or almost any song from her album Blue. She's fabulous, and Positively 4th Street by Bob Dylan. They're all three great songs.
Okay, and where do you get your news from?
As many places as I can, but and especially places I disagree with, because you have to know. I tell people I read Pravda during the Cold War, and people say, "Well, isn't it full of lies?" I said, "Yes, that's the point. When you know what the other side is lying about, you know what they care about, because you're not going to lie about something you don't care about, and you can use inferential method to kind of push it. We use this in intelligence gathering. So I will admit I read the New York Times. I think it's full of lies, but I like to know what they're thinking."
Is there an author, a podcast, website, or social media channel that you recommend?
Oh, again, there are so many. I'm very active on it's now today it's called X. Used to be Twitter, same channel. I'm very active on it myself. I get a lot of news from it, particularly when you have breaking news. In the 1980s, you might turn on CNN. Now they're completely unreliable. But I'll just go to Twitter, probably have it open anyway. But you got to filter because there's some junk on there. But it's particularly X now that Elon Musk owns it. It's kind of pure First Amendment, freedom of speech, and really quick breaking news.
What is your favorite fast food?
Five Guys, little cheeseburger with
Okay.
jalapeno peppers.
Who are you afraid of?
No one. I do recall, the Bible says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I think there's some good advice there. But it's not that I don't think about things or I don't think, I mean, there are dangers. You do need warnings. You do have to be careful. I take precautions. I'm not a reckless individual. At least I try not to be. But if you run around afraid of everything, you're not really going to be yourself.
Mm-hmm. Who makes you laugh?
I love comedy. I don't think there's much of it around today, unfortunately, because of wokeism and not too many stand-up comics are actually that funny. But if you go back, I like slapstick comedy. So, uh, a movie like It's a Mad, 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 Mad World with, I had everyone from, Jimmy Durante to Three Stooges, Buster Keaton, Carl Reiner, and so on. Extremely well done. I'll take a Marx Brothers or Three Stooges any day.
Who is the celebrity you would be most nervous meeting?
Great question. I've met quite a few. Mick Jagger, Paul Simon. I've met, Chairman of the Fed, Presidents of the United States. Uh, and it's always interesting. It's interesting to meet people in person you've seen on TV, and you can begin to say, well, are you, are you a good guy? Or maybe some people are jerks, but not that many. Most of them are actually very decent once they get off stage or off camera, or whatever. So I'm not that nervous about it. I'll tell you one trick. When if you're meeting a top celebrity, particularly a public policy official, here's a little hint, and they've written a book, buy the book, kind of keep it behind your back a little bit. When you go up to introduce yourself, bring out the book and say, "Excuse me, Mr. Chairman or Mr. President, would you mind autographing the book?" I promise you, every author will drop everything and autograph a book. They can't resist, including myself. And so while they're signing, you can strike up a conversation. So it's a good having that person's book and asking for an autograph is a good icebreaker and a way to get through the nervous factor and just start a conversation.
So you've just told us the way to your heart. So if anybody out there wants to meet James Rickards, he just told you the way to his heart and the way to get his attention. What's your order at Starbucks?
I try to avoid as much as possible. I'll go to a local coffee shop, but Starbucks logo started as a mermaid, but it's actually a manifestation of Lilith, which is an ancient symbol of Satan and the Antichrist. So probably a good idea to steer clear of that.
I find that very interesting that you stay clear of that because of the symbol. I find that very, very interesting. I would not have expected to hear that from you. Because most people think that somebody like you, who's as brilliant, who has walked in the corridors that you've walked in, wouldn't be taking serious things in the Bible. But as we talked earlier, the Bible is actually a very serious book. How many Kardashians can you name?
Probably zero. I mean, in all honesty, I've heard of Kim Kardashian. I don't, I get confused. I don't even try to track the family. I have to consult my daughter if she's better at it. But I've never seen their show. I never watched it. Not that interested, but I guess there's a person named Kim Kardashian out there.
What's your version of hell or the worst way to spend a day or an evening?
Two different things. The worst way to spend any time is to be cold, really cold. And it's funny because I've lived on glaciers. I've done a lot of high altitude mountaineering, ice climbing. So I've been in some very cold environments, been to Antarctica and elsewhere. But you can dress for it. You can be in 20 below temperatures in a tent sleeping on a glacier. But if you have the right fleeces and the Everest rated sleeping bag and down booties to keep your feet warm or whatever, it can actually be comfortable. But to not be dressed for it and actually be freezing is pretty uncomfortable for me.
Okay. Well, you've answered and given us a great insight into who you are. And I want to thank you today for coming on the show. I want to tell anybody who's tuning in to definitely get a copy of Jim's book, MoneyGPT, and its threat to the global economy, or AI's threat to the global economy. And I will definitely look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Erika.
Okay, Jim, thank you so much. Again, thank you so much. I have to tell you, I was floored when James Rickards came out with additional 666s that he found in technology or within the scriptures. This is exciting stuff, folks. These are unbelievable days. We are certainly in the end times, and AI is an fascinating topic because it actually fits in the book of Daniel. There is a passage in Daniel that talks about the God that the Antichrist acknowledges, a God of forces. And when you look at the verse, it's talking about technology. And why would the Antichrist, who establishes himself as God, honor another God? Because that God helps him be a better dictator and control the masses. Well, you're definitely going to want to stay tuned for more on this channel, for more insights from our notable guests. And be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't subscribed to this channel, share these videos, and also if you have an idea that you would like me to talk about or to cover with a guest, definitely let us know in the comments. Till next time, stay tuned.